When my phone buzzed at work with a frantic, silent alert from my home security system, I expected a false alarm. Instead, the live camera feed made my blood run entirely cold. There was my own brother, standing in my living room, shouting at my sobbing, terrified 9-year-old daughter while my older brother was down the hall, ruthlessly ransacking my bedroom for my late mother's jewelry and our property documents. They thought I was securely trapped at my desk an hour away. They thought a single mother would be too weak, too easily intimidated to fight back against family. But as I sprinted to my car, my hands shaking over the steering wheel, a cold, hard rage took over. They thought they were taking everything I owned. What they didn't know was that they had just walked into a legal and financial trap I'd been quietly preparing for months, and their nightmare was just beginning. My name is Alyssa. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I had to make a decision that permanently shattered my family. For most of my adult life, I believed that blood was thicker than water, that no matter how toxic or greedy your relatives became, you still protected them. But that was before my 2 brothers showed up at my home with crowbars, intent on destroying everything I had sacrificed to build. To understand why they did it, you have to understand Julian and Marcus. Julian, my oldest brother at 41, has always worn his entitlement like a badge of honor. He ran through his portion of our late mother's estate within a year, drowning in failed business schemes and high-interest debts. Marcus, 3 years younger, was his loyal lieutenant, aggressive, loud, and deeply resentful that our mother left this house entirely to me. They viewed my home not as my sanctuary, or as the roof over my 9-year-old daughter's head, but as a bank account they were wrongfully locked out of. Because I was a single mother working 50 hours a week, they assumed I was weak. They assumed I would eventually cave to their synthetic sympathy and endless demands to hand over the property deeds to satisfy their debtors. For weeks, I noticed subtle changes: a missing spare key from my purse, small scuff marks near the back window, and an eerie influx of overly polite text messages asking about my weekly work schedule. They thought they were being incredibly clever, dropping by to subtly probe into my filing system under the guise of checking up on us. But after living around their calculated moves for decades, some of their cunning had rubbed off on me. I knew a storm was coming. I just didn't expect it to strike while my daughter was home alone. It happened on a Tuesday, right in the middle of a high-stakes afternoon meeting at my office. My phone, sitting face down on the desk, began to vibrate with a persistent, erratic pulse. It was a silent, high-priority alert from my home security system, the one I had quietly upgraded just 2 weeks prior. Apologizing to my manager, I stepped out into the quiet hallway and swiped open the live camera feed, expecting to see a delivery driver or a stray dog in the yard. Instead, the breath was knocked completely out of my lungs. Through the lens of the hidden living room camera, I saw the front door forced open. Marcus was standing right there in the center of the room, his face twisted in rage as he towered over and shouted at my 9-year-old daughter, Lily, who was sobbing and trembling on the sofa. Down the hall, the camera in my master bedroom showed Julian ruthlessly tearing through my closet, ripping open drawers, and hunting for my late mother's jewelry and our original property documents. They thought I was securely trapped at my desk an hour away. They thought they had all the time in the world to strip my life bare and intimidate my child into silence. A cold, terrifying rage took over, freezing the panic in my veins. Sprinting out of the building toward the parking lot, I barely remember turning the key in the ignition. As I pushed my car to its absolute limits down the highway, my hands shook violently over the steering wheel, but my mind was completely clear. My brothers had just crossed a line from which there was no return. They thought they were taking everything I owned, but they had just walked into a trap. As I finally screeched into my driveway, the sight of Marcus's rusted truck parked crookedly on my lawn made my stomach twist into hard, angry knots. I cut the engine, the sudden silence inside the car heavy and suffocating. Before I tell you what I found behind that door, I want to see how far our community reaches. Comment below with the city or country you're watching from, and let me know. What would you do if your own blood betrayed you like this? I forced myself to take one deep, steadying breath. My fingers rolled over the phone screen as I quietly dialed 911, keeping my voice a low, urgent whisper to the dispatcher. Two men have broken into my house. They are aggressive, and my 9-year-old daughter is trapped inside with them. I gave the address, slipped the phone into my jacket pocket with the line wide open, and stepped out of the car. Sneaking up to the front porch, I carefully pushed down on the brass handle. The door drifted open, and the raw sound of my daughter's crying hit me. I stepped across the threshold, slamming the heavy wooden door behind me. The loud bang echoed through the house, and both men froze instantly when they saw me standing there. Lily let out a gasp of pure relief, trying to run toward me, but Marcus stepped into her path, his face quickly shifting from surprise to a sneer of practiced dominance. Down the hall, Julian stepped out of my bedroom, a velvet box of jewelry clutched firmly in his hands and a stack of official-looking papers stuffed under his arm. "Alyssa," Marcus said, his voice instantly dropping into that patronizing, false gentleness I had grown to despise. "You're home early. Don't make a scene in front of the kid. We're just here taking what belongs to the family bloodline. Dad and Mom would have wanted us to have this." Julian nodded, stepping forward with an aggressive arrogance. "We know you've been hiding the original property deeds, Alyssa. Your little solo real estate venture ends today. We are drowning, and your selfishness is ruining this family. Hand over the remaining titles, and we walk away cleanly. If you fight us, we will tie this house up in estate litigation until you're completely bankrupt. You understand?" They were trying to gaslight me, using their physical presence and empty legal threats to crush my resolve. They thought I would crumble, just like I used to during our childhood arguments. I purposely let my shoulders slump, forcing tears to well up in my eyes as I played along with their narrative. I needed to look entirely weak, broken, and defeated. I needed to keep them talking, completely distracted and anchored right where they stood, until the flashing lights arrived. Seconds later, a sudden crimson and blue glow began flashing violently against the living room windows as the distinct wail of police sirens filled the street. Julian and Marcus both panicked, their aggressive confidence instantly evaporating into pure terror. Before they could even make a move toward the back exit, the front door was forced wide open, and 3 uniformed officers burst into the room, their commands echoing loudly through the house. Marcus was immediately forced onto the floor, and the stolen velvet jewelry box slipped from Julian's trembling hands, clattering loudly against the hardwood. Because I had already set up high-definition cameras and filed an official trespassing warning with the local precinct weeks ago, the officers didn't waste a single moment listening to my brother's frantic excuses. They were swiftly handcuffed right in front of my daughter and me, arrested on the spot for breaking and entering, grand larceny, and child endangerment. As Marcus was being roughly pulled to his feet, his steel eyes locked onto mine, shouting that I was destroying the family over a few old rings and a piece of paper. I simply walked over, picked up the velvet box, and looked him dead in the eye. A cold smile spread across my face as I delivered the first devastating blow. "You should have looked closer, Marcus," I whispered loudly enough for both of them to hear. "I knew you had a copy of my old key, every single piece of jewelry in this box, and every property document you just pulled out of my safe are high-quality fakes I planted there intentionally. The real assets are locked in a bank vault you will never touch." In the days following the dramatic arrest, the silence from my extended family was completely deafening. It didn't last long, though. Soon, their high-priced defense attorney began calling me, attempting to use aggressive intimidation wrapped in false concern. He desperately pressured me to drop the charges, claiming that dragging my own brothers through a public trial would permanently ruin the family reputation. He even hinted that a prolonged court battle would drain my limited savings as a single mother. They still thought I was completely defenseless, operating on outdated assumptions. That was when I decided to deliver the ultimate counterblow. I arranged a meeting at my lawyer's office and invited their counsel. As soon as we sat down, I quietly pushed a thick manila folder across the polished table. Inside was ironclad forensic evidence gathered by a private investigator I had hired months ago. The documents meticulously detailed how Julian and Marcus had been systematically forging my signature on fraudulent loan documents, attempting to use my inheritance as collateral to cover their massive debts. "Here is the deal," I said, my voice carrying a cold certainty that made their lawyer turn pale. "Your clients are going to plead guilty to the break-in, and they are going to sign a legally binding release waiving all future claims to our mother's estate. If they refuse, or if either of them so much as breathes in my direction, I will immediately hand this embezzlement file over to the federal prosecutors. They won't just be facing a local breaking and entering charge, they will be looking at decades in a maximum security prison." At the final hearing, my brothers sat at the defense table, completely stripped of their usual arrogance. Faced with the ironclad embezzlement evidence and the threat of federal prison, they had no choice but to sign the papers. They accepted a devastating plea deal that gave them probation, heavy fines, and a permanent criminal record, while completely barring them from ever contacting me or my daughter again. As the judge banged the gavel, finalizing the orders, I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. They wanted everything I owned, but their greed had left them utterly broke and legally exposed. 3 months later, I sold the old house filled with toxic family drama and moved Lily to a stunning, sunlit cottage overlooking the coast. The sale left me with enough financial security to ensure she will never have to worry about her future. We upgraded our security, planted a vibrant flower garden, and finally found the peace we had been denied for years. Looking back, my brother's biggest mistake wasn't just breaking into my home. It was assuming that a mother's quiet life meant she lacked the strength to protect it. They forced my hand, and they had to live with the consequences. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever had to cut off toxic family? Comment your thoughts below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the screen 2 other stories that will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until the end.